Howdy kids, and welcome to another episode of Escaping the Cave, Tonzilla X-Pod. Hi there, I'm Todd. This is number 132. Record date, very early morning hours of April the 30th, 2024. Hi. How's life? This is the last of my microphone experiments. I don't know that you'd notice, probably not, but I do. I've been rotating these microphones I've got here to try to figure out which one I like. This is the one that every podcaster in America, it feels like if you're doing any kind of a podcast, that this thing is almost required. The Shure, S-H-U-R-E, the Shure SM7B. One of these days, I think I'm going to do a YouTube video comparing all of these. I hardly ever use this thing. I got it basically for a guest mic. A lot of people love it. But back in the radio days, a couple of the stations that I worked at had this microphone. I never really liked it. I don't know. It's all personal preference and probably how I'm using it or not using it, but people love it. And it is simple. You gotta give it that. Getting to know you. Is this the sharing part? Are we bonding? Do you feel closer to me? You want a hug? Yeah. I'm in a mood. Semi to moderately sarcastic tonight. It's been a week, huh? These protests continuing. The anti-Israel is how Fox News is portraying it. And pro-Palestine is how the CNN portrays it, and I really don't care how MSNBC is spinning it. Well, it's weird. You bounce around these channels, these different outlets, news, air quotes, sources, how they present it, right? I can't do MSNBC again. Like I said this last week, I say probably every week. I don't pay any attention to it, and I haven't for a long, long time. I used to watch, Keith Olbermann. I guess back in the mid 2000s. He had the Countdown show. He kind of sucked me in a little bit. He had the good night and good luck thing. He kind of saw himself, I think, as the modern day Ed Murrow. You know, I left my Coke on the other side of the studio. Excuse me for a second. Can't go without this. Anyway. Yeah, Olbermann liked to fancy himself as the modern day Edward R. Murrow. And I kind of bought into that for a little while. He was on the air. He was on MSNBC when I was coming kind of to the tail end of the radio days. And I kind of admired what he did. I mean, a lot of that's because of my political leanings. I was reading a lot of Michael Moore at that point. But he went on the air, and he was unabashedly a commentator. He took a side. He went against George Bush. He went against the Iraq War. I used a lot of his material, a lot of his audio, and some of the pieces that I would produce at the various radio stations. Like, yeah, that's the kind of thing I think I would like to do on the radio. And then something happened with him. He gave hatched Rachel Maddow. And then he got shit-canned. He went away. And Maddow, that's where she got her start and took off and did her thing. But Olbermann, he's a weird case study because he is immensely talented. Believe it or not, whether you agree with his politics or you don't, the man had skills all the way back to ESPN. Keith Olbermann and Dan Patrick on Sports Center back in the 90s, it was an event. He was that good. And then when he moved off to news, it was like, eh? And he kind of, unsheathed himself. And he had a definite, staked out a definite claim in the media landscape. And then he went away. I don't know what he's doing now. I think he had a show on, was it GQ? Something. But he can't find work. Nobody wants him. As talented as he is, as smart as he is, as articulate as he is, as good on camera as he is, he has an ability to get a following, but nobody wants to hire the guy. Nobody wants him anywhere near their building or in their studio around their people. Anyhow, it's been a hell of a week, even without Keith Olbermann's presence. Joe Biden Had a poll come out this week. I think it was done by CNN, not exactly an anti-Biden outlet. Mr. Biden has the lowest poll numbers of any president at this point in his term in 70 years. 70 years, so that'd be like the 40s? No, we're looking at 70 years, 50, yeah, like, what is it, Truman? But his mark is I think it's around 38% approval. By way of comparison, I think Trump was at 46. He's below Nixon, below Jimmy Carter. I think he's below George W. the First. Yeah, obviously, he lowest in 70 years. He's definitely finishing behind all of these one-term presidents. Not looking good for him. And I was watching CNN yesterday. They had one of the Democrat spinmeisters over there saying that it's the poll numbers are because, you're going to love this, it's because Dementia Joe hasn't fondled, filleted, and appeased Hamas and their college-embedded U.S. sleeper cells enough. He hasn't leaned in to the pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel crowd enough. Like, really? You think that's it, huh? Yeah, well, by chance, there's another poll out there. Found this one on the New York Post website. 80% of Americans, according to this poll, take it for what it's worth, one poll, but that poll says that 80% of Americans favor Israel over Hamas. 80%. And most back what most people consider the inevitable Rafah operation. 80% of the country favors Israel over Hamas. Duh. Are we shocked? Is anybody out there shocked? Raise your hand. I can see you. Raise your hand. I don't see any hands of anybody that's shocked out there. Well, no, I see a couple of those Columbia fucks. Okay, put your hands down. You need to shave those pits. 80%. You know, I said a week or two ago, maybe I say it every week. I might just say it every week. In fact, it may find its way into the title of this podcast, He Who Chases Two Rabbits Catches Neither. It's Confucius.
I'm a wabbit's way up.
And it's applicable. Dementia Joe, or whoever changes his diaper and feeds him his pudding, has been on a rabbit hunt for months. And personally, Biden lost me for good. About the time that he stuffed that wrinkled paw up Dearborn's burqa. Criticizing Israel to get votes from Dearborn. From Dearborn. It didn't work. Look at the numbers. It was never going to be enough for these people. For the comradely Marxist hordes, he was never going to win over in the first place. He was never going to get these lunatics. He was never going to get these far leftists. He was never going to get the Bernie crowd again. He wasn't going to get them again. He wasn't going to get AOC's crowd or Tlaib's crowd. None of these people that you see finger clapping at the DNC convention calling each other comrade, whining and complaining about gendered language, you're not going to get those people. Joe Biden was never going to get any of those people, but he tried, and in the process managed to alienate anybody who might have been on the fence. Anybody who supports Israel over Hamas, who may have been on the fence, everybody sees through it. Everybody knows what's going on here. Everybody knows why he's pandering, why he's saying the things he's saying. So let's not forget what happened October 7th, by the way. You never hear about that. You just never hear about it at these protests. You never hear about the images that came out of Israel, out of these kibbutzes back on October 7th. You never hear it mentioned. All you hear about it is the poor suffering of the poor Palestine, the oppressed. The oppressed. They're being oppressed by the little tiny nation that all of these other Arab countries surround. They're being oppressed by them. Those poor Palestinians. You never hear anything about the hostages who, I think they're all dead. There may be 4 or 5 live, but the rest of them are dead. Otherwise, you might hear some negotiations, some actual good faith negotiations going on to try to end, to get the ceasefire. These radical Islamic extremists are not known for keeping their prisoners alive. Do you remember all the beheading videos we saw from ISIS, Al-Qaeda, 15, 20 years ago? They're not known for their mercy. And we never hear about that. I mean, we never you never hear about anything that happened on October 7th, except you might hear that Israel deserved it. Now that might come spewing out of somebody's mouth. But all you hear about is the suffering of the poor Palestinian people. This week we saw people getting on their knees in Islamic prayer at these encampments. These Occupy-style encampments is what this is. Look at the idea from Occupy. They sort of evaporated into like a fart in the revolutionary wind. This one seems to be spreading right now. But still, I would love to hear, I would take you a lot more seriously. Whether or not you're at these protests or you're just somebody that's spouting off about the poor Palestinians being oppressed by little tiny Israel, I'd take you a hell of a lot more seriously if you even had ever mentioned, most of you just keep your mouth shut about October 7th. You don't say anything. You show no sympathy, empathy, horror at what happened on October 7th. Yet, oh my God, Jesus Christ, you talk about the poor Palestinians. You're like motherfucking Teresa. Really? What's wrong with this picture here? What's wrong with this picture here? You've taken the oppressed Marxist red pill. I only say red pill because red is Marxist. And somehow you've bought into this line that Israel, the Jews, somehow, how do you get there? How do you do that in your head? You're literally surrounded by people, countries that want them exterminated, eradicated. They're saying it. They are literally saying it at these protests, these pro-Hamas protests. They're literally saying, from the river to the sea. Some of the more brave ones out there will actually get in front of a camera and say the quiet part. It's not so quiet anymore, is it? They'll actually get up and say, yeah, we want Israel wiped off the map. What does that mean? If you want the state of Israel wiped off the map, what does that mean? How do you intend to get there? Describe the process to me. That's what they want. Intifada. I can finally say it because I've heard it, maybe 200 times this week. Intifada, intifada. These white boys, these white kids, bouncing around the encampments, wearing burqas and Hamas headgear, Hezbollah flags flying, decorating George Washington's statue. Did you see that? Oh, that was nice. That was sweet. That was perfect, actually. I was talking about how you have to desecrate the monuments. You have to tear down the monuments to the gods, to the old religion, so you can establish your new. There's no better metaphor for what I was talking about than that image this week. I don't get it. I don't understand. I guess I don't understand if you take them at their word, right? But I think I might understand it if you don't. If you take this through a wider angle lens, this doesn't have to make any sense if you look at it or think of this as basically just an anti-American movement. They're going to say it's about Palestine. They're going to say it's about black lives and defunding the police, but everything, all of it's about, all those roads intersect. There's some intersectionality. At tearing down the system, anti-Americanism. Anything that runs counter or creates friction in this system or moves towards the goal of dismantling it, deconstructing it, I dare say, they'll embrace. How far back has this gone? I have video. You know what? I could probably do this. I have it digitized. I have video of me that I shot. I don't know if I have video of me. I don't think I shot myself there. But I did film other people. At the 2003, 21 years ago, the protest in New York City, just before we invaded Iraq, I think it was really in conjunction and combination with 9/11. I think that's really what kind of activated me politically. I wasn't political before any of that. A lot of people weren't political before that. But that was easy. Scott Ritter and George Bush, you had, the little conflict. He tried to kill my daddy, thing with Saddam Hussein. And it was pretty clear to most people, not the media and not anybody who really just wanted to go to war to blow somebody up for 9/11, but it was pretty clear at that point in time that Iraq had nothing to do with September 11th. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. They had sent, investigators in there. Came back with nothing. The guy who said there were none, oh my God, well, he had a sex charge dropped on him. That's convenient. Scott Ritter. That was easy. Going to that. And then being, anti-Bush, that was easy too, especially post-Iraq. Yeah. I mean, I've come a long way from there to here. This isn't the same. Those weren't anti-American protests. Those were anti-George Bush protests, perhaps. But that didn't feel like it was anti-American. So where did this come from? Where did all of this spring forth from? These contemporary protests, the ones going on today, places like New York City. Did you see the video from Austin from Monday? Whew. It was getting a little chippy, wasn't it? But I'm really curious. I am beyond curious about where all of this has come from. I've talked about this on the show in the last couple of weeks, talking about Christopher Rufo's book. It answers a lot of these questions, and I think accurately. I've got my radar up on this. I've got my bullshit detector going as far as Mr. Rufo goes. I think he got this right. He may be a far-right propagandist, admittedly. But I think he got his research right when it comes to Marcuse and the slow march, not Sherman's march. I think I said Sherman's march a couple of weeks ago or last week. Yeah, sorry. Or March to the Sea. It's just the long march, Mao's long march, not the long march to the sea. That was Sherman. Sorry. It happens when, this is why I take notes. But I'm really curious. I want to know where all this is coming from. The stated goal is they're pro-Palestine, this and the other thing. But if you watch, if you pay close attention to what's going on, if you actually read the signs and listen to the words that are coming out of their mouths, it's also about the deconstruction of the American system. With their replacement, as I've said, these are insurgents, these are ideological colonizers. The goal is to deconstruct what's here to replace it with something else. The new God, the God of cosmic justice, the collectivist God of cosmic justice.
How dare you?
Utopia. A DEI dreamland. Yeah, it should be great. And Dementia Joe, Joe Biden, he's played right into their hands with this. Getting desperate for votes, desperate for good press, desperate for these young kids who can't stand him. The only reason they got on board with him in 2020 was because of the pandemic and because the far-left avatar stood down and shut up. They had to make a deal with Biden in 2020. I'm going to go back to that just for a second because there's no way. There's no way. And people like Cortez and Tlaib and Omar, Bernie, after he got out of the race, they made a deal. You shut up, leave Dementia Joe, leave the old man alone until we get through this election, and then you can get what you want from him. Just let us win. Please don't cock block us. It's the only thing that explains what's happened with this man. He's, what is he, 81 now, 82, whatever the hell he is. How many 82-year-old woke flakes do you know? How many 82-year-olds do you know in your personal life who think that it's a good idea for boys to play girls' sports? Just this one. It's the only one I know. Something happened. And it's a continuing a theme here. He's pandering to the far left because either because he made an agreement, had a gentleman's agreement, a handshake agreement, with the Democratic Socialists, these woke flakes, these comradely hordes that I've talked about, he had a gentlemanly agreement with them in 2020, or whoever's changing the diaper and feeding the pudding, is in charge and making decisions and just propping him up like Weekend at Biden's. Wipe my chin. Did you see the video of him giving the speech, reading off a teleprompter the other day? He's up on stage, blah, 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 blah. Looks at the teleprompter, blah, 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 4 more years. Pause. The crowd starts chanting 4 more years. He reads the line, the instruction line in the speech, telling him to pause. He reads it. How long, how many years has this man been reading off a teleprompter? How long has he been in politics? How many speeches has he given? Maybe a journalism student or a political science student who's practicing giving speeches their freshman year. I don't know. Do they do that? I've used a teleprompter before. I know how they work. He's been doing this for decades. Tell me there's not a cognitive decline when this old man starts to read the instructions off of the teleprompter because he's not fully there. Who's running things? If he can't read a teleprompter, you're telling me that he's going to negotiate and try to get the hostages back from Hamas? What the hell's going on here? You have enough common sense. You understand this if you have any old people or have ever had any old people in your... Who is running the damn country? The guy who can't read a teleprompter? He gets confused by the words on a teleprompter. He can't decipher in real time between the speech and the instruction line telling him what to do. Get the crowd going. 4 more years. They started it. They were probably, coached into it. And then he just shits on it. Pause. His staff is so worried about the optics of his gait, his walk, the way he walks, that they've started to surround him on his way to the helicopter. Air Force One, 2, I presume. I don't know about that, but I saw it. They just gather in around him to take attention away from how infirm he is. It's disturbing. And we're supposed to believe this guy, this man, who was hyped up on something during the State of the Union. He gave a great speech. The State of the Union was great. Where's that guy? He doesn't show up anymore. It's because he was hyped up on something. They probably did the same thing to Trump. They probably had these secret drugs. Maybe some meth. Meth for the president, the presidential meth lab in the basement. I don't know. I don't have a problem with that, to be honest with you. Okay, well, if it sharpens him up, good. He needs it. Is he going to take some years off his life? He's done pretty good. Let him have it. I don't care. But that man, I don't want him in charge. I think I would actually be a little more comforted. I would be comforted if I found out that somebody else was responsible for things in the Oval Office. I'd be pissed off. Be pissed off that we've been deceived and lied to, but I would feel better about the direction of things, how things are going to go, how things could possibly proceed. I would feel much better if I found that out. At least moving forward, at least till the election. Now, this man, Biden, he has played the part of Hamas's useful idiot. He's given aid and comfort to Israel's enemy by criticizing Israel, telling them, attacking one of those IDF units for stuff that happened sometime before October 7th. They're going to take funding away from a specific unit because of stuff that happened before October 7th. So why are they investigating it now? Why didn't they investigate before October 7th? Well, they need a pretext. Did anybody defund the unit that bombed or drone struck the wedding under Obama? No. Anybody ever held accountable for that? Our own people, our own government. Was anybody ever held accountable for that? But in response to what per capita is a far more devastating attack than 9/11 was, they're going to start nitpicking, micromanaging Israel's response to this? Aid and comfort to Israel's enemy. In response to Dearborn, to what's happening on the campuses around the country, these anti-Israel, anti-Semitic largely, pro-Hamas demonstrations and protests that are happening around the U.S., he's responding, he's letting these people dictate his motion, his movements forward, or somewhat is. He is a useful idiot. His kids have been indoctrinated. They are no different to me. I've said this before, maybe to somebody's horror out there, but I have compared those kids, these little sleeper cells that have awakened around the country, I've compared them to Westboro Baptist Church. Remember those kids 10, 15 years ago who were holding up the signs? God hates the FAG word. Remember that? All these little kids, how horrified. Oh my God, how can you let a little kid do that? How can you molest a child into believing these things or saying these things? Or how could you let a child hold these signs saying these horrific, terrible things? How indeed? Well, this is what happens when indoctrinated children grow up. Public school system shoving this stuff into these children for years. Again, I'll go back to Rufo. It started with the colleges. It started with the institutions, invading, slowly marching into the institutions, starting with the colleges. Well, it's gotten into the educational system. We all know this. Every single one of you knows this, especially, I don't even have children, and I know this. If you have kids, tell me you don't understand that. Maybe you're a liberal. What are you doing? You're lost here, obviously. Sorry, might want to change the channel. But if you're a liberal, you probably go, oh, we're just teaching them to be better. If you're not, you probably have been seething in quiet rage. Maybe not so quiet rage. Oh, this has been going on for years and years and years. And there's another book I'd like to share with you. It's by William Storr. Again, remember I talked about him a couple of weeks ago? He's got a book called Selfie. It's not one of his better-known books. I bought it. I expected to hate it. But it gets into where this stuff started. Back in the 60s, I think with the Esalen Institute out in California, focusing on the ego and self-esteem. You're so perfect. You just need to be self-actualized. Your feelings are all great. Be who you are. Be who you really are and tell everybody else to go fuck themselves. That kind of thing. Sound familiar? The Esalen Institute, I don't know that I've ever talked about that, but I'm very familiar with it. It's around Big Sur of Highway 1, I think, California. But this is a big deal back in the 60s. And something happened, I think, with one of the, God, I'm getting off into the weeds here. Need to go back and check my notes. But I think something happened, some scandal or a suicide. Something happened with somebody, one of the main players, main characters at this place. They kind of lost their influence. But that self-esteem bullshit, that started moving into the education system. There's a great story in there. God, I need to read. I'm going to do a piece on this at some point. I'm going to go dig this out. I've got the notes on my Kindle. But one of the studies that was done at one of the universities was falsified. It was basically a bullshit study. But it was that study on self-esteem that started this whole self-esteem movement into education, I think in the late 80s, early 90s, just after I got out of high school. If you were in school in the early 90s, you probably started to notice this. How do you feel? Tom, what about Johnny's feelings? Everybody should get a trophy. You know, the old trope. The stereotype, right? Well, that's where this shit started coming from. And I think what we're seeing today, a lot of it, I think is the poison oak that is sprung from the little acorn that fell out of the Esalen Institute in the 70s and maybe the 80s. The book is called Selfie. William Storr. I love this guy. He is my favorite new author. It's like finding the headwaters. I read this book on Stanley Livingston. back in the 1800s. The big thing was to find the headwaters of the Nile, find the source of the Nile, and they never could. A lot of the stuff that I'm reading from Store feels like I'm heading that direction, getting closer to the headwaters of whatever this is. Anyway, not sure where that tangent began. Was talking about Joe Biden. Lost me. Done with him. I don't know that I'm going to vote for Trump. Haven't decided that yet. But I'm not going to be supporting Joe Biden. I may just go vote for, down ballot stuff, but that man is not getting my vote. I'm done with him. And if they end up going into Chicago, which is going to be, by the way, the DNC convention in Chicago is going to look like the 68 convention in Chicago. You know anything about history? Anti-war protests. I think Lyndon Baines Johnson decided he wasn't going to run in 1968. Did it late. Did it in March, I think. So the Democrats had a primary. Bobby Kennedy and Humphrey, I think, right? Well, Bobby Kennedy gets shot. And the 68 convention just blew up in Chicago. Because you had all these anti-war protesters going in. They were trying to figure out who was going to run against Richard Nixon. If you're from Michigan, you're a baseball fan, you know anything about the Detroit Tigers, you know that in 1968, there were riots all over the country. Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King shot. The country was in chaos in 1968, including at the Democratic Convention in Chicago. Cops beating these protesters. A lot of people, including people who are protesting around the country, think that exact same thing. And they've said it. They are making plans and arrangements to protest. I alluded to this in another episode. I got a video that talks about this out there. They're saying they're going to go to Chicago again in August to protest and demonstrate against the Democrats, presumably, supposedly because of what's going on in Palestine with Israel. Or is it just an anti-American fit, temper tantrum, anti-American intifada? The gringo intifada. Is that what that is? Is that what this is? You're going to dress up in your burqas? You're going to face Mecca and kneel down in prayer? Maybe wash some feet? Anyway, look for that. Look for that in August. I have not looked forward to any of these conventions. I don't watch these things. You're not telling me anything. You're giving propaganda speeches. You're giving PR speeches. You're feeding people bullshit the whole time. They don't make any sense to me. They don't matter to me. This one, I'm going to watch. Going to be good. And here's the funny thing. A lot of these commentators, depending on who you watch, depending on what, like I said earlier, depending on what network you watch, will determine the angle of the spin, whether it's pro-protesters or it's anti-protesters, pro-Hamas, pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, whatever. Depending on the network. Again, I don't watch MSNBC. I can take a pretty good guess where they're coming from. I know where CNN's coming from. They're always sympathetic to the protesters, the righteous protesters. Oh, these children, they're just trying to change their world. Fox News the other way around. Anyway, when it comes to these protesters, looking forward to August, I'm sure that if you go to these protests, I'm sure there are plenty of moist Marxist panties looking forward to the righteous protest, the righteous expression of outrage. Changing the world with your protests and your demonstrations at Grant Park and beyond in Chicago. I'm sure of it. I'm sure they think they're going to change the world. I'm sure they have images. They've been fed these images of these protests in 1968 and told, oh my God, they were part of the solution. They helped end the Vietnam War, which didn't end until, 1974, 75? Do you think they've read enough about the 60s, about American history to understand that those protests, in conjunction and coordination with the riots and the assassinations in 1968, got Richard Nixon elected? Have they noticed who won that election? Who who was in office after 1968, starting in 1969? Not a Democrat. Richard Milhous Nixon. Huh. Kind of weird, ain't it? If you know anything about history, if you're familiar with Richard Nixon, he ran on a law and order campaign to end the violence, end the chaos, crack down on the chaos. Once he got into the White House, and he won. But while you're having visions of replicating the righteous protests of 1968, just keep in mind, Nixon won. Those protests, the images of those protests, combined with the images of those streets burning, kind of like BLM in 2020, the assassinations, and Vietnam, the anti-Americanism that was on display, led to Richard Nixon, helped elect Richard Nixon. Richard Milhous Nixon. Nobody liked Nixon, man. But he won. Hunter S. Thompson loved him. I'm relatively certain that very few of these children, these deluded children, these indoctrinated children, have any idea. I think they just see themselves as changing the world. Their Messiah complexes in overdrive got them drunk, got them intoxicated with self-righteousness, gonna save the world. We are on our way to the Holy Land, the Promised Land, utopia, collectivist nirvana, and the brotherhood of man. How's that working out? I was thinking this to myself the other day. How's the brotherhood of man thing working out? How's that global government, that global citizenry thing that we hear so much about? How is that looking now? Not only in this country, but around the world. How's that working out? How are we doing? Went and saw Civil War yesterday. I finally broke down. Wasn't sure I wanted to see it, but that was the predominating thought through my head watching that movie. It really, like most people say, I'm not a movie reviewer, okay? I suggest you go see it. Cinematically, it's beautiful. It's well done. It's fantastic. The story's, it's okay. But the thing that I was thinking about the entire way through this, I put a lot of things into the context of the material that I talk about on the show, and I'm just thinking to myself, this is tribalism. This is the worst of humanity that flares up a lot. You give people a group, you give them something to fight for and a team to fight against. There you go. And I kept thinking to myself, we're sitting in the movie theater, munching on some popcorn. I kept thinking to myself, brotherhood of man, my ass. How are you going to do that? And seeing these visuals on this big-ass screen, we did not see it in IMAX. You don't need to. Although it'd be pretty cool. You just don't. It's a good movie. Anyway, think of myself. Now, these images aren't that far-fetched. There have been worse images of this, than this in warfare before. Nothing close to what happened on October 7th. And you think that the brotherhood of man, this global utopia, the global theta than ray, you think that's coming? How? We just have to come together over me? I don't think so. The urge to save the world is usually a cover for the urge to rule it. Beware of those who come walking in with a Messiah complex. We're in the robe. We're going to save the world. We're going to bring humanity to whatever. I've been around enough of these people. Personally, I like first-person interactions with enough of these people. I think they do believe their own bullshit. Most of the time, but almost always. It's a matter of wanting to take control. I know better than you. I know better than everybody. We know better than everybody how things should go, how things should be. and we want to take the wheel and do it. Jim Jones. I have a wonderful biography back here. It's going to be another show. Have I mentioned that? Probably. I'm going to do a show on that guy at some point down the road. He was the original woke flake. Did you know that? His church in Indianapolis, before all this crap out in California, I think was the first or one of the first, I think it was the first integrated church in Indiana. He was all about equity and inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion. He was all about it. He also used religion to, well, not going to spoil the story, but it's instructive. He was a Messiah. He fancied himself as literally the Messiah. He sold himself as the Messiah, and a lot of people bought it up. He was going to save the world. He turned into exactly what you would expect, the tyrant. The controlling tyrant who injected children with cyanide rather than lose control, lose his collectivist commune down in Guyana, rather than be held accountable, rather than have his people leave by their own choice. He decided to kill them for their own good. Beware of the Messiah. Anybody who thinks they're a Messiah, anybody who's acting like a Messiah, anybody who's trying to save you and lead you by the hand to the promised land. Grab your wallet, hug your kids, and get the fuck away from them. And to bring this back home, all of these people on these campuses, all of these people in this ideology, this invasive species ideology, talking about global unity, the brotherhood of man, the global community, this utopia. It's never worked. The rhetoric is the same. People have tried it before, but why is it always ending up with a bunch of dead people? Famine, murder, gulags. How many people Che Guevara personally executed or order killed? It never works. And we're supposed to listen. How many times do you haven't done it the right way? How many times are you supposed to hear that before you just want to smack somebody in the mouth? Like the Batman meme where he's smacking Robin. You see, just stop. But again, you're dealing with children most of the time. You're dealing with children who think that they have found something new. Like they've discovered something brand new. Oh my God, this socialism thing sounds really cool. Why has nobody ever tried to do it? Also, there were some frat boys at Arizona State this week who descended on one of these encampments from Arizona State, started tearing the tents down as the police looked on. I can only imagine that these children, these protesting, screaming, whining, complaining, colicky children, were wondering why the police weren't helping them. Why aren't you stopping them? The ones that they want defunded, the ones that they scream and call fascists by day, want protection, want their property protected by night. I don't know this for sure. I don't know that they did that. I'm enjoying the imagery and the assumption that they did. And Ilhan Omar. Oh, she's a peach, isn't she? She showed up for her photo op of solidarity at Columbia University, I think it was this week. Walking around, getting her picture taken, giving hugs, solidarity hugs. Was she censured for anti-Semitic statements once upon a time? Is there any shock that she's there? Where's Rashida been? Where's Tlaib? Has she shown up there yet? You know, Cori Bush has been spouting off. Who else we got? AOC. Oh, yeah. She's been a peach as well. She gets enough airtime. I'm sick of talking about AOC. We know what that is. You don't think that they'd nominate her, do you? At the convention? Come August? Oh, God. I really hope not. On that note, I'm going to wrap things up for this one. If I do that now, pretty much guarantees a second episode this week because there was supposed to be another segment to this, but I went out a long time. And I was going to go out by asking that question. I'll ask it one more time. How did we get here? How did these kids, these colicky children, the colicky children of Columbia et al., how did they get here? How did we have so much anti-Americanism flood in these campuses? Well, I have an idea. We'll get into that, I think, next time. Yeah. Sociological propaganda. A couple new videos up at the YouTube channel. Go check those out. It's a slow process. I don't know why. It is. But there's a couple new ones up there. We've got a couple more in the works, I think. Look for another episode hopefully later this week, maybe soon. If not, we'll talk to you next week. Thanks for clicking in. So long.